Hello, welcome to CubsPS Plus, a Northside numbers game, a weekly podcast that dives headfirst into the analysis of hot topics driving Chicago Cubs baseball. I'm your host, Mike Waller, a lifelong Cub fan, full-time baseball stat nerd, and sometime youth baseball coach. CubsPS Plus is part of the Bleacher Bunch Productions on the Fans First Sports Network, joining great shows like The Sun Ranto Show, Cup of Cubby Blue, and Baseball Rabbit Hole. Bleacher Bunch feed is available wherever you get your podcasts, and CubsPS Plus is always available, ad-free, to Patreon supporters at patreon.com/CubsPS Plus, where you can support the show for as little as $1 a month. In addition to the podcast feeds, you can also find me on Twitter, X, Instagram, TikTok, Threads, Blue Sky, and YouTube, all at CubsPS Plus. The spin on the baseball metric, OPS Plus. Love the pod or hate it? Please drop a review wherever it is you find your podcasts. If you've done that, thank you so much. Maybe you can share an episode with a friend. It's April 24th. The Cubs are 14-9, and there's a lot to talk about. Are you ready? I'm ready. Well, this isn't great news. While I was recording, the Cubs announced that Cody Bellinger does have a rib fracture and is going to go on the injured list. During the episode, I didn't talk a lot about the injury, but I did mention that I thought it seemed like it was going to be fairly minor and hopefully just miss a couple days. But I don't know, somehow the Cubs got an x-ray last night that said everything was negative, but then today there's a rib fracture. So hopefully it's small and hopefully Cody doesn't miss that much time, but I want to get this update in here before you feed in the rest of the episode. Welcome into episode 76, the Daniel Garibay episode of this podcast. Garibay, a left-handed pitcher from Mexico, made his big league debut in 2000 with the Cubs and went on to pitch in 30 games, making 8 starts for the Cubs. He posted a 2-8 record with a 6.03 ERA over 75 innings that year. This week, Cubs are 14-9. I want to talk about roster depth. I've talked a lot about roster construction and what I think Jed was aiming for this year. And depth is a big part of it. And I think that's a big reason why the Cubs are where they are. So let's talk about that. We've seen a lot of changes already. There were a flurry of moves yesterday. So let's talk it through. So the Cubs are 14-9, and that puts them among the better teams in baseball, which is a little bit surprising because I think when I watch the games, when I see what the Cubs are doing, when I read fan interactions on Facebook and Twitter and social media, online, read comment sections, listen to podcasts, there's kind of been a lot to complain about. And yet the Cubs sit at 14-9. Clicked on the schedule instead of the standings. The Cubs are a half game behind the Brewers in the Central. You know, they're like 2.5 games behind the Braves. Braves have the best record in the National League. They'd only be a game and a half, I think, out of the American League East against the Yankees. The Guardians are 17-6, but the Cubs would be competitive in any division in baseball. They have the 7th best record in baseball so far. And it's funny because in some ways, I don't know how they're doing it. They haven't been great starting pitching. Obviously, they have a ton of injuries. So let's walk through that first. So you've got Justin Steele, who's been on the injured list since opening day, hurting himself opening day. Jamison Tyone has made 1 start. He started the season on the injured list and just recently came back. And he's pitching tonight, by the way. Kyle Hendricks has been awful and is now on the injured list. Drew Smyly is on the injured list. The Cubs lost Julian Merriweather early to an injury that's going to keep him out for a couple months. They've had Seiya Suzuki out. Ian Happ has missed time. Cody Bellinger now sounds like probably down today after colliding with the wall last night. And so with all those injuries and some key guys have struggled, Nico Horner got off to a terrible start. Christopher Morel is something like 3 for his last 42. Starting pitchers they've been pretty decent. They've not gone deep in games. The bullpen has seemingly been a mess the entire season. How are they doing this? Now, some of it is just, and they're not just doing it against fluff teams. I mean, they have played the Rangers, they've played the Dodgers, they've done a road trip to Seattle, San Diego, and Arizona. They're playing the Astros right now, who are admittedly struggling, but this is still a good Astros team that is not going to stay this bad forever. And it's funny when you get down to it, I really think they're doing it on depth. You know, all offseason we talked about the Cubs. What are they going to do? Were they going to be super aggressive early in the offseason? I know that the Cubs did make a push at Shohei Ohtani. It doesn't sound like Ohtani's camp was serious about going anywhere other than the Dodgers. Fine. And then once the Dodgers got Ohtani, once you're spending $700 million on one guy, even if it's basically all deferred money, you're going to want to build a team around him that's going to win. You don't want to spend that money and just, collect ticket revenue. So I think a lot of us thought the Cubs would do more, and there was a lot of talk over the offseason about should they do more? Who should they go after? Should they have gone after Jordan Montgomery, who was unsigned for a long time? Should they have gotten more bullpen help? There were a lot of guys out there that seemingly, we're not at prohibitive prices the Cubs could have gotten. And now the Cubs sit at a point where one of the bigger complaints I hear all the time is money, that they're cheap, that they're not going to go over the luxury tax. They're basically already there. I mean, if you look at whether you look at Roster Resource or whether you look at Spot Track, the places that do the best job of tracking this stuff, the Cubs are currently sitting about $2.5 million under the CBT this year. And that does not include, roster churn they may have during the course of the year. They may see somebody on waivers and grab them. There are also guys with performance incentives and escalators in their contracts. And there's no way a roster of 40 guys is going to go through an entire season with nobody hitting performance incentives. So the Cubs are essentially already over the CBT, the first tier of the CBT. So I don't think that's an obstacle. I think they're going to add at the deadline, assuming, things continue as they are. Heck, if Cody Bellinger opts out of his contract, they're already over, because that will retroactively take his contract from 3 years, $80 million, which is about $26.7 million AAV, to 1 year, 30. So that'll raise it 3.5, and boom, the Cubs are over. So I don't think the first tier of the CBT is any consideration for what the Cubs are doing this year. They're covering injuries so far. And I think Jed made a big bet. I talked about this a little bit before, but not quite in the way I'm going to today. Jed made a big bet on the organization, the farm system, and the guys he already had here. And I think I can make an argument right now that it's paying off. I think there were a couple approaches that could have been done this offseason. The Cubs could have gone and signed. Now, they did sign Shota Imanaga. They did bring in Hector Neris. They did make a trade for Michael Busch and Yency Almonte. So they did bring in some help for some of those positions where they were needed. They could have brought in 2 or 3 starting pitchers instead of just Shota Imanaga. They didn't. They decided to bet on the fact that they had any combination of Javier Assad, Jordan Wicks, Ben Brown, Caleb Killian, Hayden Wisniewski, Cade Horton coming up at some point, hopefully this year, Riley Thompson, Drew Smiley, that they had guys in-house that could get those outs that they need. And the bullpen side, that's where, if I'm going to make a criticism, it's the bullpen side. I think they should have done a little bit more on that side of the house. But at the same time, they had a number of guys that don't have options that I think they wanted to find out about. Yency Almonte is one in particular. Can Edward Alzolay stay as closer? I mean, at this point, we know the answer to that is no. Whether he can battle back and get back to that spot, I don't know, but it is not working this season. And that's the crazy thing, too. The Cubs have blown 4 saves. Or Adbert's blown 4 saves. If he just hangs on to those leads, and it's been home runs late, and at least one of the games was certainly not all his fault, because that was the 9-8 loss to the Padres where the Cubs were ahead 8-0. Any one of about 4 pitchers could have potentially stopped the bleeding on that. But you flip those games, the Cubs just convert those saves. Instead of 14-9, they're 18-5, and basically they'd have the best record in baseball. So the Cubs have been that close, and I think there's talent in the bullpen. I think that needs to get reworked. But I'm probably not going to talk a lot about offense in this show. It's probably going to be very pitching heavy. But let's back up and let's talk about the moves that were made yesterday. So early in the day, we found out that Matt Mervis and Hayden Wisniewski were being called up. But there weren't corresponding moves tied to that yet. So there was a lot of speculation during the day. Would Alexander Canario go down? Was Ian Happ going to go to the injured list since he had missed a couple days with his hamstring? And on the pitching side, Hayden Wisniewski had just recently been sent down, and by rule, you can't come back up to the major leagues until you've been in the minors for at least 15 days, unless you're replacing a pitcher that's going to the injured list. So right off the top, we knew that a pitcher was going to go to the injured list, and the obvious thought is Kyle Hendricks. This has been, I think, probably without a doubt, the worst season of Hendricks' career so far. And it's been painful to watch. I mean, I love Kyle Hendricks. I love guys who do it differently. And that's been him his whole career. He doesn't throw with the velocity. He locates. He will work that changeup, work the off speed, work the corners, and then all of a sudden he'll pop a 89-mile-an-hour fastball, and the hitter is so late on it makes it look like he's throwing 96. He's been fun to watch my whole career. Obviously, he's the last piece still from I guess Carl Edwards Jr. is in AAA right now. But he's the last piece remaining from that 2016 championship team, and he won 2 of the biggest games I've ever watched in my Cubs lifetime. He beat Clayton Kershaw in Game 6 of the 2016 NLCS to put the Cubs in the World Series. And then he started Game 7, which the Cubs won, and so I'm always going to have great memories of Kyle Hendricks. He's very close to having, 10-5 no trade rights. He's very close, and some of this is not stuff fans worry about a lot, but he's getting very close to his service time to lock in his pension for the rest of his life. He's a guy who's put in the time, put in the work, and he's earned those things. And Danny and Sarah talked about it on Cup of Cubby Blue this week about the service time stuff. And I'm with them. I hope that this has to get fixed, and Kyle Hendricks can't continue to pitch the way he's been pitching. But also, I hope he gets to the point where he accrues the service. However this ends with the Cubs, I hope he gets to the point where he accrues the service time to get the pension and all that. Nobody's crying poor for baseball players at this point, but that's something that the union negotiates for, and he's been a good teammate, a hard worker, a good pitcher for a long time, and I hope he gets that. But so the speculation was that Kyle Hendricks might go to the injured list, whether he's pitching poorly because maybe something is bothering him, or maybe it's one of those, fake IL stints that a guy goes to just work on some things and try to get better. There's also talk about Drew Smyly. I had missed this until following the Discord a little bit yesterday because the latter part of Sunday's game, I was just tracking remotely on my phone. We had some family stuff. So I didn't see that before Drew Smyly went out to pitch his second inning, he was in the dugout working with the trainer, and Elise Menaker had talked about them kind of grabbing and checking out Drew Smyly's, his left leg, his left leg. It'd be his drive leg as a left-handed pitcher. And so would it be Kyle Hendricks or Drew Smyly, or would there, is it somebody else that we weren't even thinking about? Maybe somebody who hadn't pitched in a couple days. And the answer was both Hendricks and Smyly. So they both went to the injured list. Luke Little joined Wisniewski in coming up, and Luke Little was another one that couldn't have been brought back up without an injury. So now the Cubs add Kyle Hendricks and Drew Smyly to the injured list, bring up Wisniewski and Little. Now Little's going to go in the bullpen and be a lefty arm, and when he throws strikes, he's really good. He's had some outings where he's not thrown strikes, where he's frankly been kind of awful, and that's what got him sent down. But when he's throwing strikes, he's very tough to hit. He's a lefty. He throws upper 90s. He's got a weird arm slot. Feels like it has to feel like he's releasing the ball about 5 feet from the batter. So I hope he can get it going. Now, Wisniewski is interesting. Craig Counsell has talked a lot about him since he got hired as a starting pitcher. I think he really likes the idea of Wisniewski as a starter. Now, over his career, Wisniewski has had trouble getting left-handers out, and that's why we've seen him in more of a bullpen role and less as a starting pitcher. But they have put him down in Iowa to get stretched out. And when you look at his numbers down there, he pitched in 3 games in Iowa, started twice, and it's been pretty good. It's got a 2.53 ERA, a 1.13 WHIP. He's given up 9 hits and 2 walks in 10 2/3 innings, which is pretty rock solid. 3 walks, not 2. 3 walks, struck out 10, striking out about a batter an inning. And that's what they want to see. Now, I don't know the splits of what he's faced down there, so we'll find out. He came up recently and jumped into a game and threw 4 absolutely brilliant innings that the Cubs absolutely needed in Arizona, I believe. I'm suddenly blanking which game that was. Yeah, it was Arizona right before they came back home. And so the question now is, now that he's back up, what's going to happen with Kyle Hendricks' start? Hendricks will be on everybody on normal rest, given what they've got lined up against Houston. Hendricks would look to be slotted in that Saturday start in Boston. So is that going to be Ben Brown? Ben Brown pitched last night. but sometimes you can throw a guy out of the bullpen, on his bullpen day when he's going to throw anyway. Or it does look like it's not the first time that Ben Brown has pitched out in the bullpen. So it may be that Brown's going to be in the pen for a little bit, maybe to help keep his overall innings down. And if that's the case, then maybe Wisniewski, who was obviously didn't pitch yesterday, so I can't say he hasn't pitched since he got called back up. It's been one game. But maybe Wisniewski is the guy who's slated to go on Saturday. And on the offensive side with Matt Mervis, they wound up designating Garrett Cooper for assignment. And that one, in the big picture, it's not hugely surprising, although it did catch me a little by surprise yesterday. I thought, especially given the injuries they've had with some of the bats that have been struggling, with Patrick Wisdom just back from injury, that I really didn't think that they would get rid of a player yet. They had a number of guys who have options. So if Patrick Wisdom is going to be up and you're going to call up Mervis to try to get another lefty power bat in that mix, Canario could go down. Patrick Wisdom has an option left. Nick Madrigal has a couple options left. So those guys could have been sent down briefly. Christopher Morel, who's I mentioned has been hugely struggling lately. Like, there were guys available who could have gone down to the minor leagues. But at the same time, I've talked about this before. Like, some of my issues with the Cubs roster construction are that they've got some redundant guys. Patrick Wisdom and Garrett Cooper are largely the same player. I think Cooper's a little bit better, certainly a better contact hitter. I'm not sure if I'd say better hitter overall. They both have power, but Wisdom has more power. Wisdom can play a few more positions, is a little bit faster, but neither one is, even though Patrick can play more positions, not particularly great defensively at any of them. And probably the best position for each guy is first base, and Michael Busch is pretty much locked into there. So they were really kind of a redundant player, so that made a lot of sense. I still have issues with Nick Madrigal on this roster. I've said it before, but I think Nick Madrigal is absolutely a Major League Baseball player, and I think Nick Madrigal could be a starter for a number of teams, but not this Cubs team. He can play pretty solid, maybe even good second base. He can play a solid third base. Can't really play short. And he's shown, not only with the leg injuries, but when he's been at his best, when he's hit well with the Cubs, his kind of dream state is that guy who can hit maybe a poor man's Luis Ariz. You're going to hit 315 to 330, a lot of ground ball line drive contact, not a ton of power, get some doubles out of it, but just a contact machine. But what we've seen from him is he's able to do those things when he's playing every day. And there's just no place for him to play every day on this team, especially with Christopher Morel getting better and better on defense, although you've got to get that bat going again. Nico Hoerner is going to play second base virtually every day. And Nick Madrigal has shown he's not nearly as good of a hitter when he's just getting part-time reps. So I would love to see at some point this season for him to, whether get sent back down to Iowa, go on a tear again like he did last year when he was coming back from injury, get him, if somebody has an injury or somebody just needs a contact bat. Maybe they've got a rookie who's struggling at second base or something. And there's a place for Nick Madrigal in this league. There's just not really a place for Nick Madrigal on this roster the way it's constructed. But so Garrett Cooper was the odd man out. And even though Mervis is a first baseman DH, so he doesn't bring any positional versatility, he's not fast, he brings power and he brings lefty power. And that's big. That's something this team's missing. One of the pros that I like about Miles Mastrobuoni for as rough a year as he's off to so far, that's left-handed. Cubs don't have that many lefties. They've got Cody Bellinger, Mike Tauchman, Hap switch hits, and that is Michael Busch now, but he's playing every day at first base. So on the bench, after they sent Mastrobuoni down, the only bench player really was Tauchman that bats lefty, and he's starting most of the time. And now you at least get a bit of a mix. While Seiya Suzuki's out, Tauchman's going to get a lot of starts. And hey, how about that double Oppo Taco basket day yesterday? He just shows over and over again that he's a really, really good fourth outfielder who can fill in when guys are down, need a day off, whatever. But with Garrett Cooper gone, that gives Matt Mervis another chance. And I will say that there's a lot of criticism. There are a lot of people who still like Matt Mervis and are still excited about him. A lot of people also say, well, he's shown he can't hit. He did get 99 plate appearances last season across 27 games. He had an OPS of 49. I thought by the time he got sent down, he was having a lot better plate appearances. But in terms of like that being giving you the ability to read a guy, I also want to point out, and none of this, is any kind of inference for me that, hey, I guarantee Mervis is going to be great. I have no idea. We don't know yet. But Michael Busch, for as well as he's playing this year, he and Mervis both played in 27 games last year. For each of them, it was their, first foray into Major League pitching. Mervis had about 18 more plate appearances than Busch did. Busch posted a 49 WRC plus. Mervis hit 4 home runs, I think. Maybe it was 5. And I mean 3, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 home runs. Busch hit 2. Neither one did well. But we see what Michael Busch is doing. Like the Cubs clearly didn't just look at the stats last year and say, well, yeah, he got almost 100 plate appearances in the bigs. He didn't do anything. He's not good. That's not really how this stuff works. I mean, Anthony Rizzo, his first season in the bigs was with San Diego. He got 153 plate appearances and he was awful. He came to Chicago and had some struggles, was up and down a little bit, and then figured it out. Some guys do. Maybe Mervis will and maybe Mervis won't, so I'm not trying to declare a side on that one, but I am declaring that I'm not ready to be done with Matt Mervis. I think there's a lot there. Now, Michael Busch has always been a better prospect for a bunch of reasons. He's a little bit better athlete. He can play more positions. In fact, first is not even the position he played the most. He played more second base than anything else with the Dodgers. But even with that flexibility, both Mervis and Busch have big power, and we've seen that power from Busch this year. Busch has a little bit better hit tool. They both have pretty good eye. They both can work the count, but Busch is just a little bit better with contact, a little bit lower K rates, and so that pushed them up the list. But I hope now that I would love to see them both when the Cubs are facing a right-hander. Busch at first base, Mervis at DH. Hopefully they both start mashing. I know Mervis had a rough night last night, but again, it's one game. So I would ask people to be a little bit patient. Give him a couple weeks before we start making any grand proclamations about whether he's great or terrible. So those were the deals yesterday. And I think the offensive side has not been great for the Cubs, but it's not been bad either. They're, Christopher Morel did well early, is struggling now. Ian Happ is a bit of a slow start, but mostly he's been Ian Happ. Nico Horner was off to an atrocious start, hot now. They've done enough, but they haven't really been a great offense. When I look at, last year the Cubs were a top 10 offense in baseball. And when I look at it this year, look at Fangraphs, in terms of runs scored, the Cubs are 6th, actually. They got off to a quick start, so they've certainly been good enough. But it's the pitching really that tells the biggest story. And I want to start with the starting pitchers. So the starting pitchers on the whole, Justin Steele looked absolutely fantastic the first game until he fielded that bunt and, injured that hamstring. So I'm hoping all the reports from his rehab have been good. They said he's been at every step of the way. He's been at or ahead of schedule. He's going to throw a complex league game, I think Friday, and they think maybe first week of May, second week of May at the worst, he's back. So he maybe misses 2-3 more starts, and the Cubs seem to be covering him, but getting him back is obviously massive. But after that, the starters have not been bad at all. Shota Imanaga's been great. The one disappointing game from him was when he couldn't finish the 5th inning, and that was because of a long rain delay against the Dodgers. And Jamison Tyone came back. He's been good in his first start. Jordan Wicks, Hendricks has been bad, but we've already talked about him. We'll set him aside from. Wicks has been solid. His big issue until last night was pitch efficiency. Too many big counts early in games, too many early walks, too many times walking guys at the bottom of the order to turn the lineup over and have to face the good hitters again. And he's had games where against the Dodgers, he was at 51 pitches through 2 innings. You're just not going to get deep in games like that. And until yesterday, he hadn't finished 5 innings. I think he could have the start before, but Counsell went ahead and pulled him anyway. He was at 75 pitches, I think, at 4 2/3. But yesterday he was great. Yesterday he was just pretty consistently right around 13, 14, 15 pitches every inning. He ended the game 6 innings, 86 pitches. So that's right at like 14 and a half pitches per inning. That's exactly where he needs to be. that gives him enough, he doesn't have to go out there and run out, like 6-pitch innings, although I'll take any of those whenever I can get them. He's going to get his Ks. He's going to get some big counts. Yesterday, he didn't walk anybody. He had 4 Ks. Did not give up a lot of hits, but he had the Astros hitters off balance all day long. He got a lot of early swings because he showed early that he had his great changeup yesterday. So guys were trying to attack fastballs early in the count. I saw him work Yordan Alvarez for a strikeout. I think it was in the first inning where he was, working the edges, showed him the changeup. And then I think Alvarez was looking changeup and he was a mile late on 94-mile-an-hour fastball. That's where Jordan Wicks needs to be. Ben Brown has been very good filling in. Javier Assad continues to just be Javier Assad. I keep hearing about, the stuff doesn't look great. You go to the Baseball Savant page and he's got just the weird mix of blue and red where he gets a lot of weak contact overall, but high barrel rate and no whiff and no chase. And I think, he's over, let's see how many innings he has this year. Or not this year, but for his career. He's at 168 innings for his major league career at this point. And he's got an ERA at 2.94. If you believe in FIP and expected FIP, his FIP is 426, his expected FIP is 442. So those are not numbers that scream luck. He's not had any particular run of outlier activity. Dude just gets outs. And so he's going to be enough of a sample size that I know he relies on location. So if he's not sharp, there's some days where he's going to get hammered, but I don't think it's fluke. I think it's to the point where the dude could just pitch. And he's shown he can start. He's shown he can pitch out of the bullpen. We saw in the World Baseball Classic that he could just chew up the American roster and just, fly through a bunch of elite hitters. But again, the Cubs are not getting deep enough in games. And I think one stat that really bears that out is you look across baseball and the start that Wicks had yesterday was the Cubs' 5th quality start of the season. And in my head that seemed low, but it's been 23 games and I don't know what the average rates are. I was going to have to go look at that. And I looked it up and the Cubs were tied for last in Major League Baseball in quality starts before yesterday. So now they're tied for 24th. The Guardians and the Nationals have 4 quality starts each, and then the White Sox, Cubs, Marlins, Brewers, and Mets are all tied at 5. On the flip side, Philadelphia's had 15 quality starts. Seattle's had 13. The Royals have had 12. The Giants have had 12. Pittsburgh and Toronto have each had 11. A bunch of teams have had 10. And that really manifests itself in the number of innings that starting pitchers have to throw. So the Phillies, leading the league with 15 quality starts, their starters have thrown 216 innings. It's literally double the amount of innings. Get my filter back in here. Their starters have thrown 142 innings, and the Cubs starters have thrown 108. Only the Brewers have thrown fewer, and the White Sox have thrown a third of an inning more than the Cubs so far. So basically the Phillies starters have eaten, 34 innings. They've eaten almost 4 full games that the Cubs bullpen wouldn't have had to pitch. Obviously that's the extreme end. So you look in the middle, Texas is right there at 15. They've got 8 quality starts and they've thrown 19 more innings than the Cubs have. And that's what's been killing the Cubs. The starting pitching hasn't been bad, but it has been quite good enough. And the bullpen has been a little shorthanded, and even the bullpen has not been so terrible. Now, Adbert's really struggled in the closer role. Jose Cuas really struggled when he was up. But the biggest thing there is that the Cubs relief pitchers are coming in, and they're too often not throwing strikes right away. So a starter gets roughed up a little bit. Maybe the Cubs are ahead, maybe they're behind, but the starter's leaving at 4 1/3, 4 2/3 with a dirty inning, and somebody comes in, walk a guy, throw a wild pitch, give up a hit, give up a run or two that impacts the game, and then that guy maybe comes out the next inning, and then he's fine. That happened to Jose Cuas multiple times. I remember the game against the Dodgers that Wicks started. Wicks got to 4 2/3 innings, and he was at like 90-something pitches. So they pull him out. They go to Quas with, I think, 2 guys on. Maybe the bases were loaded. Like 2 on, bases loaded, something like that. Quas comes in. Yeah, 2 on, because Quas came in. He walked Teoscar Hernandez as his first hitter. And then Max Muncy was up. And Quas threw a wild pitch, run scores. Runners go to second and third. And then Max Muncy hits one off the right field wall. So now all of a sudden, what was I think a 0-0 tie at that point with Wicks against Yoshinobu Yamamoto is now a 3-0 game. Quas gets out of that inning and then throws a really good inning the next inning. But nobody cares about that next inning because not that I don't care, but it doesn't really matter. Like, even though by the stat line, it would show that Quas gave up 1 run in an inning in the third. The reality is he allowed 3 on the. Now, I mean, Wicks gets to share that, and Wicks ERA takes the hit for it. But it's those first couple, reliever comes into a clean inning. You can walk a guy, give up a hit, whatever, work through it, get out of the inning, no damage. Hector Neris has been living on that this year. But you got to come in throwing strikes. And if you're not doing that, that's been where the Cubs have lost leads and things have started to snowball. But also, because the starters haven't been going too often, they're not even getting through 5. The bullpen is having to cover 5+ innings. Like, for a stretch, it was like literally every single day, just about, except for maybe Shota starts. And that just is so much strength. You're forcing guys to go out there and pitch on consecutive days a lot. You're also, you only need, if it's a close ball game, and the Cubs have played a lot of close ball games, if it's a close ball game and you got to throw 4 different relievers out there, you only need one of them to have a bad game to really hose things up and put you in a bind. You need to have 3, 4, sometimes 5 guys out there all do their job in order to get the win and lock those innings down. You get a starter who's going, 6 innings, gosh, even into the 7th. All of a sudden you have to get 2 1/3, something like that out of the bullpen. You have a lot more options. You're going to keep guys more fresh. You can, if a guy comes in and walks 2 hitters in a 1-run game, you can, I guess you have to face 3 batters now, but whatever, if you come in and get in trouble, you can go get that guy out, go to somebody else, and it's a little bit more okay. Now, the Cubs have not necessarily always been able to do that because they've had that game in San Diego where they lost the 8-0 lead. They had 4 guys down that basically probably couldn't have pitched that day. I suppose if it went extra inning, they could have done something, but they were very limited on their options. So not only did they have to have 4 guys do their jobs to get through, those are the only 4 choices they had. So those specific 4 guys had to do their job. And that's just, baseball's weird and not everybody has it every day. And sometimes a guy is not a great matchup and whatever. So that's really where that starts. And I think in the bullpen, so going back to Jed and betting on depth, I think the starters have been pretty solid. Ben Brown's looked really good. Kyle Hendricks, hopefully he'll get right. If not, they'll have to make some hard decisions with him at some point. But the Cubs have already started, technically they've had 8 different starters this year. But one of them was Luke Little as an opener, really, so that one doesn't really count. But so, we talk about a team needing to have 9, 10, 11, maybe 12 starters over the course of a season. I think the last 2 years, the Cubs have started 9 and 10 different guys. And some of that was 2022 where you're trying some guys out late in the season. But last year, the Cubs competed and still had to start, 10, 11 guys. And this year with the injuries, they're already at 7 and they're in 8. So that doesn't even include Hayden Wesneski hasn't started yet. Cade Horton hasn't come up. We haven't seen Riley Thompson. Thomas Panona's at Iowa throwing pretty well. So there are still a lot of options the Cubs haven't even explored yet. In the bullpen, it's been a mixed bag. Like I said, a lot of guys have actually thrown fairly well. It's just been in very specific spots where they've struggled and given up too many runs. And some of the guys they've sent down have been good. Some haven't. I was looking at numbers this morning before this. And, on the good side, Jose Cuas, his big issue in Chicago was command. He has tremendous movement. I mean, his movement on his pitches is off the charts. But if he's not locating around the zone, if he's not close, nobody's going to fish and go chase that sweeper. So for him to be effective, he has to have command. So I don't know the quality of hitters he's faced since going back down to Iowa, but he's pitched 4 innings across 3 games. So small sample size, absolutely. But in those 4 innings, he's given up 3 hits and 1 walk, 1 run, and he struck out 6. So he's down there pumping strikes. He's in the zone. He'll be back up in Chicago at some point, and that's how it's going to be. Keegan Thompson threw reasonably well at Iowa. He got hit a little bit. Looks like he had 1 outing that kind of blew up his numbers a little bit. But he came up, and he's looked really good in the bullpen since he's come back up. You look at Carl Edwards Jr., and he's off to a good start this year. Let me find his numbers. He is 2.7 ERA. He's thrown 6 2/3, 5 hits, maybe a couple too many walks. He's walked 4 in 6 2/3 innings, struck out 5. But he's been effective. And one guy I'm rooting for right now is Brad Wick. The Cubs, ironically, the Cubs traded Edwards Jr. to San Diego for him back in 2019 when Edwards Jr. was really, really struggling and I think just needed to change the scenery. Wick has had physical injuries. He had a heart issue. He's had all kinds of things. He hasn't pitched at all since 2021. And it was starting to really look like he might never make it back. And he's pitching really well. Now his velo's down from where it was before. He's kind of sitting 86, 87 on his fastball a lot of times, although he's still getting good differential. He's throwing his slider like 78, 79. I've seen a couple in the StatCast data like 67 to 70 mile an hour knuckle curve balls. I don't know if that's a real thing or if that's a misread. He's not throwing very many of them, certainly. But at Iowa, he's pitched in 6 games, thrown 9 1/3 innings, 7 hits, 1 walk, 11 strikeouts, 2 runs. So he's getting it done, and he's a guy who could come up soon. And that was the thing about the Cooper move. So what the Cubs gained by DFAing Garrett Cooper is a 40-man roster spot. So the Cubs right now have, when they put Julian Merriweather on the 60-day IL, they brought up Colton Brewer. Brewer, when he was down at Iowa, 1.17 ERA and 7 2/3 innings, 3 hits, 2 walks, 9 strikeouts. So he was throwing really well at AAA. And it's a lower level baseball, so the stats are going to be better. He's looked, I don't know, not enough for me to tell. I don't know that he's going to be in Chicago long. I mean, he's a journeyman reliever who hasn't stuck anywhere in a long time, and that's largely for a reason. But he's a guy the Cubs can use right now. He's not a young prospect they have to be careful about where they are. He's not somebody that they're going to have to juggle whether he's starting or relieving. He's not even a guy that's necessarily going to have to take leverage spots. He can just be there and be, if the Cubs just happen to get pounded one day and starter gets knocked out after 3 and you just need somebody to go eat 4 innings, Brewer's probably that guy. Or if you get way ahead, see if we can just get this thing and be good enough to take a lead to the 8th. We'll see. The Cubs aren't going to give him much runway. I thought maybe he might get cut already, but again, with the pitching depth, you hate to have a guy that is in your system and has gotten some outs and just send them packing at this point in the season. So if you can work around it, that's fine. And now that they've DFA'd Garrett Cooper, there's another 40-man spot. So what it looked like before was there was really no other spot for Wick or Edwards Jr. or if you wanted Thomas Pannone to come up and start a game. And he's started 5 games at Iowa, 2.92 ERA, 1.09 WHIP, 26 Ks to 5 walks. He's really been getting it done down there. He's a lefty. Riley Thompson, and homegrown kid, 3.38 ERA. Actually, he's only started 1 time, so he is mostly going to the pen at this point. He was mostly starting last year, so my bad on that. But he'd be another relief option. He's thrown reasonably well. 6 walks in 16 innings with 20 strikeouts. And hit a little bit. But those guys can't come up unless somebody else is taken off the roster. So who's it going to be? The Cubs are not going to DFA Kyle Hendricks. I don't think Hendricks' injury is going to turn to a 60-day IL. So where's that going to come from? So now there are 2 that they can kind of float around. And there's some other guys at the big league club. If Brewer's bad, he's gone. That'll open a 40-man spot. Yency Almonte looks really good right now. So I I think he's going to stick and be a Cub this year, but he's a guy with no options. So if he had come in, gotten off to a horrendous start, got to a point where you just couldn't throw him, then they probably cut ties and go. But it looked like, I first thought that Edwards might be that first guy up, but he started late, and so getting ramped up and everything, they wound up bringing up Colton Brewer. I think Edwards was probably next. Although Wick is throwing well enough that maybe he gets in there. And again, with the depth, and the Cubs have other live arms. Now, on the flip side, there are some guys who are not really getting it done down there. We talk about Daniel Palencia. He's been up, and he's got electric stuff. Great fastball, great wipeout slider, really, really plus pitches. But if he's not locating anything, he's not getting any chase, he's walking guys, then I don't care if you throw 102. If guys know you have to come back middle because you're, down 2-1, 3-1, 3-0 all the time, you're going to get hammered. And even going back down to Iowa now, it's a small sample size. I didn't look at the game log, so it could be one game blowing this up, but all the same problems he's had in Chicago. And this is where I talk about Quas. Quas, I don't care about the numbers per se. If he gets hit down there a little bit, I don't know that I care. I care about the walk numbers and the K numbers. And so for Quas to be 6 Ks to 1 walk in 4 innings, that tells me he's commanding the zone. Daniel Palencia has thrown 4 2/3 innings. He's got 4 walks and 6 strikeouts. So he's still going to strike some guys out, but he's given up 6 hits and 4 walks. So that's 10 guys he's put on base in 4 2/3 innings, and that's just not going to get it done. And so until he gets that stuff cleaned up, he's not going to be a guy that they look to recall. Cam Sanders is a guy that we're really excited about, and Greg Huss, friend of the pod, has been on a number of times. I know he loves Cam Sanders, but I've seen Cam over the last couple springs. I've watched some on minor league baseball TV. When he is on, oh my God, is he fun to watch. He's got that aura. He's got the stuff. He kind of struts around out there, but he's struggling. I mean, he's thrown 8 2/3 innings in 7 appearances. Hasn't gotten hit much, but he's walked 12 guys in 8 2/3 innings. He's got more walks than Ks. 12 walks to 11 strikeouts. That is not going to get you in the big leagues. I mean, that is like Dylan Maples bad. So he's got to get that figured out. On the flip side, Richard Lovelady, who we all saw in the spring and looked good at times, another left-hander who could potentially come up and help out. Again, I haven't looked at the game logs, but he's thrown 8 1/3 innings, and he's not walking anybody, which maybe it means he's just too in the zone. But he's given up 17 hits in 8 1/3 innings. He has only walked 1 and struck out 16, so that ratio is excellent. He's definitely getting the strikeouts. He's not walking guys, and he hasn't given up a homer. So he's getting consistently hit. And if I really dug in, I don't know, maybe there's some BABIP luck there. But so, there are some guys at Iowa that are available as depth that maybe aren't good choices right now. But when you look at this on the rotation side, you've got Hendricks, who I don't really quite know what to make of. On the CHGO podcast, on their most recent episode with Corey and Brendan Miller, who's been on this pod, shout out Brendan, did a really good job of really talking through some of the analytics around Kyle Hendricks. And when you really break down his velocity, his spin rates, his movement, and largely his location, he's the same guy he's been. His fastball velocities are right in line with where they were during his good years. He didn't lose more from last year. His pitch shapes, his spin rates, his movement profiles are all really the same. So it's not a lack of stuff. It's mostly Brendan lined up, and you see it if you watch the games. It's the 2-seamer, it's the sinker, it's the fastball he's not located. And when Kyle Hendricks has always been that guy, he doesn't throw 98. He doesn't have a ridiculous fastball. Doesn't have that Shota Imanaga rise fastball that plays up and is so hard to hit. He's got to locate, and he's doing okay with his changeup, and he probably should throw his curveball a little bit more. But where he's getting hammered is he's not locating the 2-seam fastball. And when he's not locating the 2-seam fastball, it's basically batting practice to a lot of those hitters, especially when it's been 2 and 3 times through the order. And we've seen him in all but his worst starts. He's had multiple 1, 2, 3 innings. He's had multiple scoreless innings, but then he just has those 1 or 2 innings where he'll give up like 5 straight hits, and he just can't find it to get out of it. And he's always had those moments where he'll give up a couple hits, maybe gives up a run, and then all of a sudden he just, flips that switch, gets that location back, instead of giving up a line drive to the outfield, he gives up a ground ball to shorter second, gets a double play, gets out of the inning. He's done that his entire career, and he's just not doing it this year. So can he get it back? I don't know. We'll see. In the bullpen, what the Cubs do not have right now, the Cubs do not have, I'll say, the closer. They might have a closer in there. They might have a guy who becomes a closer. Right now, they do not have a closer. So there is not one guy right now that if you sat down Craig Counsell and made him bare his soul and put everything on the line, I think he would tell you right now that he doesn't know game to game who's going to pitch the ninth inning. And for the moment, that's okay. That can be, if you want to use that as a criticism on Jed for not going and getting a guy, that's fine. I'll be honest about my own position. I thought Alzolay, I would agree with a lot of people saying he didn't have dominant closer stuff. You can win with less than a dominant closer. And he converted 22 of 25 save opportunities last year. And if he was on that kind of pace right now, it'd be fine. He might have blown one. Maybe he blows opening day and then gets it. Maybe he blows the one against the Marlins and you say, oh, well, he's got 5 saves and you blow one. Okay. But it's been too much. It's been a pattern. The home runs, I was advocating for, hey, it's small sample size, leave him out there. But 4 times in this, it's basically a fifth of their games this year. He's blown in the ninth or the eighth. And you just have to take a break from that. Maybe he can get back to that position, but I like the move. They brought him in on Sunday to pitch the eighth when they were 3 runs. Just get him in some other spots. Let him work it out. Get back to having confidence in his pitches. And then, the Cubs did that with Fulmer last year. He was a mess early on. Had a little bit of bad luck at first. It started to snowball. They had to get him out of the closer position. He went low leverage for a little while. And then they gradually built that back up. And by, the part of the season where the Cubs really got back in the playoff race, did all their things, he was a huge part of that bullpen. There were 4 guys they were riding all the time, and Michael Fulmer was one of those until he got hurt late in the season. And that's probably the path for Alzolay at this point. Maybe he goes back to being a multi-inning reliever, or maybe he just pitches when they think it's a good matchup and get him in a game and just get him consistent work. And then as the results are there, then the Cubs can gradually increase his leverage. It'd be great if he could get back to handling, is he ever going to be a big closer? I don't know. I really don't. I could certainly see him getting back to it and being a solid closer. I don't think he's ever going to be an elite closer. He doesn't have the swing and miss strikeout stuff. He pitches a little bit too much like a starter, but a little bit too much contact, which just opens up things in a tight game, close and late. But I do think he absolutely has stuff to be, a leverage reliever. A guy who comes into a dirty inning in the 7th and gets out, maybe can take the 8th. A guy who's a setup man, 7th, 8th, whatever. So the Cubs just need to continue to build there. And they've got other pieces that can work around. Neris has closed in the past, but he's been rough this year so far himself. So, he's had some opportunities. He'll probably get some more. Mark Leiter Jr. is one that a lot of people are talking about going to the closer. He could do it. Again, is he going to be an elite closer? Probably not. But what you lose there is Mark Leiter Jr. is the one guy, especially with lefties coming up, that you can bring into a dirty inning, and with that splitter, his splitter is just nasty. And when he's got that splitter working, he can come into a dirty inning and get out of it pretty quickly. And that's the ability to have him to deploy at whatever part in the game you think is most critical is a really good thing to have. And if you say, no, this guy's only going to pitch the 9th, you may have games that don't get to the 9th because you would rather bring Leiter in 6th with runners on 2nd and 3rd and 1 out when the starter gets tired. Get out of that inning and survive in advance and figure out the 9th later. So I like Leiter in the role he's in. And if I were Craig Counsell, I would leave him there. But I certainly get the push and I get the attractiveness of it. Luke Little, I think, has closer stuff. He's got to be more consistent on throwing strikes and command. He came in one game, basically gave up 3 runs on wild pitches. That just can't be a thing. Maybe he'll prove that was a one-off, but he's been a little too erratic this year and has not really been through those spots at the big league level. So it'll take a little time. I think he might actually get there eventually, though. Ben Brown is a really fascinating one because his stuff, I think he can be successful as a starting pitcher. with fastball curve, especially if he works any kind of a third pitch just to mix things up every once in a while. But his fastball is high level and his curveball is really, really good. And that fastball curveball combination, playing two hitters that don't get to see him twice and late situations, just coming in, when he starts, he's throwing, 95, 96, 97. He comes in out of the pen and just has to gas it out for one inning. He's going to be throwing a lot of 98, 9, really high velo stuff that the Cubs haven't had a lot of coming out of their bullpen. So there's some attractiveness to maybe make him the closer. I do still think he has more value to the Cubs and to baseball as a starting pitcher. I just believe that in general. If you can be a quality starting pitcher, that's more valuable than any kind of reliever except maybe the elite of the elite closers. So I'd still like to do that, but Ben Brown's going to be out at his limit this year. He's had some injuries in the past, and looking at what he's done, I think he's kind of on the Justin Steele path a little bit, coming back from injuries. So Justin Steele in 2021, after not pitching in 2020, he wouldn't have pitched in 2020 anyway because he had the Tommy John surgery, but there was no minor league baseball in 21 or in 20. In 21, he threw 84 innings. And typically, when you're trying to bring a guy up, as long as he's healthy and effective, you can typically increase the workload about 40, 50%. I've heard that from a number of people. I've talked to Matt Piro was on my podcast a couple of episodes ago. Talked to him about it. I've talked. Brendan Miller has talked about it. And when you just look at guys, you kind of see that track record. So, and that's what Justin Steele did. He threw 84 innings in 2021, and then in 22 he got up to 119. So that's almost a 50% increase. And then you get to 2023 and he jumped to 173. And he was gassed at the end of the season because that's about as far as you can push a guy. But that was an additional 50 innings off of 119. So that's another 40%. So if you take Ben Brown, he had thrown 104 innings in 2022. And then last year he had some injuries late in the season, which held him back. I think he would have been probably up to 120, 130 if the effectiveness had been there. So he only threw 92 innings. So ideally right now, if he'd been healthy all last season, maybe he's a guy who can go 150 plus this year. But as it is, you're probably looking at adding about, 30, 40 innings to that 92 he threw last year. So that would give him a season total around 120, 130. I think he'd be a little bit more than 130 plus or minus 5 or 10, depending on how effective they are, what kind of innings they are. So if Ben Brown starts the entire season, that probably means at some point you're skipping starts or you don't want to get to a point where you even have to face the Steven Strasburg question where you just have to shut a guy down. Because the Cubs are expecting to be in the race this year. So if Ben Brown is part of the pitching staff that is having them be successful, you don't want to have to take him off the table in September. Especially because a young guy like that hits an innings limit, you shut them down. It's hard to ramp back up then and then actually go pitch and be effective in the postseason. So Counsell has said that Brown will make more starts. That's probably pretty obvious. So I don't think the Cubs are going to make him the closer for the rest of the year. But he can definitely go back and forth. And I think we may see him go back and forth. And we may see Hayden Wesneski in the same mold. Hayden also has not thrown 150 in the season. He's a little bit older, but not much really. He's still sort of got that young pitcher profile. He's 26. So last year 2022, between the Yankees and the Cubs in the minor leagues, Wesneski threw about 110 innings. And then, 140 innings. I missed his big league time. So about 140 innings. And then last year, he was around 110, but that was more because he got put into a relief role, so he wasn't as stretched out. And so kind of building off that 110, but knowing he's done 140 before, this year the Cubs probably could expect him, if he's healthy and effective, to throw 150. So we may see some Wesneski and Brown maybe both playing in and out of the rotation as there are different injuries and different combos of guys and holes you need to fill. So what's also cool about that, especially when they get Steele back, and at some point Kyle Hendricks is going to come back, and the Cubs are not done playing Kyle Hendricks. I don't even think Kyle Hendricks is entirely done. I think if he comes back, maybe he takes a full 15 days, works on some mechanical things, whatever. Maybe he misses 2, 3, 4 starts, comes back. He's going to win some games this year. I really believe that. I think because the stuff is there, because the velocity is there, because the movement and all is really where he's always been. That tells me it's mental. And maybe this is a point where, Kyle Hendricks famously the last, since he came back from injury last season, was calling his own pitches. Maybe he needs to stop calling his own pitches. Maybe there's some patterns he's getting into that, whatever. There are a lot of different ways he can fix it, but anything mental, anything location-wise, he's run into these issues before and he's always been able to fix them. So I don't, if his stuff was gone, if he had lost 4 or 5 miles an hour again off his fastball, that would be telling that maybe he is absolutely cooked and is not coming back. Or if his changeup wasn't moving as much as it used to. But all that stuff is still playing the way it was before. It's location, especially on the two-seamer. So I think it's mixing up the pitches a little bit differently, being more effective with that pitch. Now, he may come back and not be able to fix it. And if that's the case, the Cubs will have to deal with that. But, if you've got Tyone pitching well, Shota Imanaga continues to do his thing, Justin Steele is back at the top of the rotation, and, some combination of Assad, Wicks, Brown, Wisniewski, maybe Cade Horton eventually are in the rotation. I feel really good about that, and I'm a lot more okay with Kyle Hendricks in the 5 spot trying to work things out. And then you've got a number of guys, Assad's done it, Wisniewski's done it, Brown's showing he can do it. They can bounce in and out of the bullpen. They go up and down to Iowa. You got Quas down at Iowa. You've got Carl Edwards Jr. Porter Hodge recently just got called up to Iowa, and he hasn't thrown a lot down there, but he throws absolute gas. He has so far pitched 5 innings. Okay, giving up a couple runs, 2 runs, 4 hits, 4 walks. You'd like to see him clean that up a little bit, but 7 strikeouts in 5 innings. So he's not ready for the big leagues yet. Needs more time, but he's got electric stuff. Maybe Colton Brewer will do some things. Maybe Wick. But the Cubs have a lot of options right now. And while Jed Hoyer has been asked and has said that he is open to looking at trades, and I absolutely believe he is, it's also not the time of year for trades to really happen. Number one, any guy who signs a major league free agent contract this offseason cannot be traded until June 15th. Or at least they have a no trade clause until June 15th. I forget which way it works. Also, teams right now aren't really in the trading mode. I suppose the Cubs could just dump a bunch of top prospects and get a guy that way, but just by overpaying. But if you're the A's and you're not going to compete in this race, and you've got a couple relievers, you're going to deal at some point this season, whether you wait all the way to the deadline or not, may not happen. There may be a valid question. But to trade in April, when most teams are just trying to figure out who they are, what they have, there's not going to be a big market. Markets get set because a team gets called by 3, 4, 5 other teams about a player. You start to compare what offers you're getting, and then you're able to say, no, I can get more from the Blue Jays. The Yanks are offering me this much. I need you to go here if you're going to make this trade happen. That sets the negotiating market, and that's just not in place yet. And so even if the A's have a guy they think is valuable, he's less valuable right now than he would be at least in the mid-June. Because at that point, more teams are going to be interested. More teams are going to be thinking about it, talking about it, and making offers. Then you can start to play off each other and drive it up. Now, there is a risk factor. If you wait all the way to the deadline, that just increases the amount of time where an injury can happen. That happened to the Cubs with Ryan Dempster back in the day. He was surely set to be the big trade piece that offseason. And then, I forget, a week or 2 before the deadline, might have my timeline off a little bit, but he got hurt right before he could get traded. So there really aren't that many trades to be had. The Cubs should continue to look at the waiver wire. They might find some interesting guys there. There are still some unsigned arms that have had success in the past. Some maybe kick the tires on someone there like they have with Carl Edwards Jr. and they signed Julio Teheran. But otherwise, you're going to mix and match with these. And I think the guys are there. I think there's talent. I think between the starters, the guys who can go back and forth, Jose Quas, Yency Almonte is looking good right now. He got off to a terrible start, but his last 8-9 innings have been really, really good. Little and Keegan Thompson and Hector Neris has had a really good track record. I really believe he's going to figure it out at some point. So you start doing those things with those guys, and I think there's a bullpen there to be had, but we're going to find out. And what we need to find out now, I talked about the Summon Cubs pod yesterday. They were just about the same exact point last year. I think they were 13-9 last year before, they finished April poorly, wound up with a 14-13 April, and then had a 10-18 May and a disastrous start to June. The Cubs are playing a really tough schedule. It's going to stay tough. They're going to Boston. They're going to play the Mets. They've got the Braves coming up. They got games against the Brewers, another set against the Padres. Like, this schedule is very front loaded, just like it was last year. And we look back last year, and everybody likes to talk about some of the individual games in September, whatever, that were blown. And you can pick apart those individual games, but it's not one game that cost you the playoffs, even if you miss the playoffs by one game. It is the fact that if the Cubs miss the playoffs by a game, that tells me they're going to be low to mid 80s wins. Last year they were at 83. Maybe this year 85 finishes a game out, or 82. Somewhere in that range is going to just miss the playoffs. And it's not about one or two games. It's about the fact that you lost, upper 70s number of times. And so you just want to consistently minimize that. And the Cubs just need to avoid hitting that skid where they wind up on a stretch where the Cubs lost from 13-9 to 14-13. They went 1-4 to end May. I think they started 0-5 in June. So that's 1-9. So they were like 11-29 over the course of the end of April to the beginning of June. And that's the kind of stretch that costs you. And that's kind of where the Astros are right now. The Astros are a really good baseball team with a really scary offense that's 7-17 right now, largely because basically their entire pitching staff has been hurt at some point or another. They're not going to stay that way. They're going to get better, but they may be doing enough damage right now that it may really make it tough for them to make the playoffs. We'll see where it goes. But that's a stretch the Cubs want to avoid. So the Cubs don't have to be great right now. They have to just, in the old famous words of Joe Madden, try not to suck. Get through this month. A few more days left. They're 5 games over right now. If they can improve that, awesome. If they can split the rest of the way and the month 5 over. And if they can play within plus or minus 3 games of 500 in a difficult May schedule, they're in a really good place. And they're above 500 heading into June. That's then, hopefully you figured some things out. But there are probably going to be some guys too that you now realize aren't going to have it. And relievers are notoriously volatile. Keegan Thompson was great in 2022. And then he was just a total mess last year. And now he's looking good. Hector Neris is one of the few that's been consistent. But you look across relievers and they're so volatile. And you may just find that, this guy is not going to have it this year and we're going to have to go another direction. But then by June, you can start to do that. And the Cubs have shown a lot of young players so far this year have been able to do some things that is going to make them a little bit more attractive as a trade piece. They're going to have, they've got depth in the outfield in terms of prospects. They've got depth in arms. And I think whatever it is the Cubs need, and certainly right now, all signs are pointing to them probably trading for a closer at the deadline, which you can always get at the deadline. And that's one thing I said during the offseason. Like, if Adbert Alzolay turns out to not be the guy, it's going to cost you a little bit early, and then it's going to cost you in trade. But it was worth taking the chance to see if Adbert was the guy rather than go spending a bunch of money on Josh Hader. Incidentally, it's been a dumpster fire so far this year too. You can always get a closer at the deadline. There are 5 or 6 that get traded every single year. So the Cubs are going to have the prospect capital to be able to go get one. And so they can do it there. And I know I've seen so much talk about Emmanuel Clase from the, and I would love to have him. The dude's a really good pitcher. But people saying right now, just go trade for Clase. The Indians have like the best record in the American League. They're off to a 17-6 start. He's their closer. He's super cheap for 3 more seasons after this one, like $4 million per year. Like, there's absolutely zero incentive for Cleveland to trade him unless maybe they go in the tank from here and they're closers or they're sellers, and you can find a deal that works for them, or maybe you take a bad contract off their hands, something like that, to try to make it work. But he's probably not the target. He's probably not a guy the Cubs are going to be in play for. And not through any fault of Jed's, just because of his contract and the way the Guardians are playing. But they'll be able to go move and get guys by June. So yeah, figure the bullpen out. If there's anybody in baseball I trust to figure out a bullpen, it's Craig Counsell. And the Cubs have a lot of live arms. They don't have as much high velo and as much swing and miss as I think we would all like to see. But there are guys in the mix that can do that. Hector Neris can do that. Leiter Jr. is doing that right now. Ben Brown is capable of that. Any of the young, Ben Brown, Cade Horton, Hayden Wisniewski, Jose Cuas, those are all guys that Yency Almonte, that when they're locating their pitches, have good swing and miss stuff and can generate Ks in the bullpen. So we're just going to have to gut this out. I'm really starting to like this team. I love Mike Tauchman, fourth outfielder. I think some of the young players up are interesting. I think the roster mix is slowly getting a little bit better. I like that there's not a redundancy between Wisdom and Cooper. I've said my piece on Nick Madrigal. I still think eventually he needs to get moved on. But we're starting to see some roles now. Matt Mervis is the lefty bat / platoon DH off the bench, kind of countering Patrick Wisdom. Patrick Wisdom can play several positions. You got Michael Bush as the starting first baseman, who's really off to a great start. Mike Tauchman is the fourth outfield. You're going to have a backup catcher. This roster is starting to come together, and it's a fun team to watch. And just remember, they're doing this right now without Justin Steele, mostly without Jameson Taillon. Seiya Suzuki is missing time. Julian Merriweather was probably, arguably, their best relief pitcher, and he's now down for 2 months. He's on the 60-day IL. He'll hopefully be back in June. I want to talk about Caleb Killian real quick. He looked really, really good in spring training. He looked like he was going to win a job, at least in the Cubs bullpen out of spring training. And that's a guy who came in the trade from San Francisco for Chris Bryant with a lot of hype, was absolutely electric. That Arizona Fall League following that season. And he's a guy who had just exquisite command. And then he lost that command. Really struggled. Not so much at Iowa, but every time he came up to the bigs, he definitely did. And then it sort of started to spiral at Iowa. But it really looked like he had fixed some stuff this spring. He was throwing hard. He was pumping 99. He was getting guys out, looking dominant. And if he can get back from that, I don't know, hopefully his elbow is in good shape by the time he comes back. Elbows are always scary. But if he can get back to where he was in spring training, he's definitely a guy that could really help the Cubs bullpen in the second half and get some velo, get some swing and miss in there. We'll see. That getting to June, July gives Porter Hodge a couple months of AAA. Maybe he's getting that command in place. Keegan Thompson can go a bunch of different directions, be multi-inning guy. He could be a late inning guy. So we're gonna have to watch him piece it together. But I think the pieces that are there for it to happen. I don't know if it will happen, but if anybody's going to make it happen, I think it's going to be Craig Counsell. So the Cubs play the Dodgers again tonight. It's going to be Jameson Taillon against Arrighetti, a rookie for Houston that has struggled in 2 starts so far. I don't know what he is. I don't know. I only see the numbers from his start, so I don't know if he was a little bit unlucky, got pounded, and one was good in the other. He's only thrown 7, 8 innings, something like that, so it wasn't particularly great in either one, really. But hopefully the Cubs hit him tonight, because then the finale on Thursday is Justin Verlander against Javier Assad. And, for all the things people say about Assad, he's pretty effective. But anytime you're going up against Justin Verlander, it's going to be a tough task. So keep watching the Cubs. Go Cubs. Thank you for joining me today. If you like this episode, please drop a rating and a review wherever it is you get your podcasts. And share an episode with a friend. Just a few seconds from you gives me great feedback and helps other Cub fans find the show. You can find me on Twitter or X, Instagram, TikTok, Threads, Blue Sky, and YouTube, all at CubsPS+. And check out the Patreon page at patreon.com/CubsPS+ to support the show. As always, the theme music for this podcast is Prospect Park West by Jerry McCoy. This is Mike Waller, host of the Cubs PS Plus podcast. Every day with Cubs baseball or talking about Cubs baseball is a great day. Go Cubs!